The house was supposed to be empty. Claire Whitmore knew that because she had spent the entire morning making sure everyone believed she was gone. At 7:12 a.m., she rolled a navy suitcase down the front steps, waved to Mrs. Dalton across the street, loaded the trunk, and drove away beneath a pale Virginia sky, as though a quiet week in the mountains waited somewhere beyond the county line. But Claire never went on vacation. By late afternoon, she was standing inside her own dark kitchen, 36 years old, a former U.S. Marine who had learned long ago that danger rarely announced itself, with Atlas beside her and the suitcase still locked in the trunk 3 miles away. The German shepherd entered first. His black and tan coat disappeared into the shadows beyond the kitchen doorway, his amber eyes moving slowly across the familiar rooms. Nothing looked wrong. The refrigerator hummed. An old clock ticked above the sink. Rain whispered against the windows, carrying the cool scent of wet oak leaves through a narrow crack in the back door. Claire closed it carefully behind them. "Home sweet home," she murmured. Atlas did not respond with the soft tail movement he usually gave her. He stood perfectly still. Claire watched his ears rise. His nose lifted. Then his attention moved toward the staircase. "Atlas." The dog took one step forward. His nails touched the hardwood with a faint click. Another step. Then he stopped. A low growl rolled from his chest. Claire felt something inside her tighten. Atlas was not a nervous dog. He did not growl at settling pipes, passing cars, or squirrels scratching around the porch. In 6 years, Claire had learned the difference between curiosity and warning. This was warning. She moved beside him and followed his gaze toward the second floor. Darkness filled the landing. Her bedroom door stood at the end of the hallway exactly as she had left it that morning, almost closed, with a thin blade of gray light beneath it. "Nobody's home," Claire whispered. Atlas did not look at her. The growl faded, but his body remained rigid, every muscle listening. Claire reached down and rested 2 fingers against his collar. The worn leather felt warm beneath her hand. For several seconds, nothing happened. The house returned to its ordinary sounds. Rain, clock, refrigerator. Claire almost smiled at herself. Almost. Then Atlas lifted his head toward the ceiling, and the fur along his shoulders rose. From somewhere upstairs came a sound, so small another person might have missed it. A single wooden floorboard creaked under weight. Claire stopped breathing. Atlas stared into the darkness. The house was supposed to be empty, but something upstairs had just moved. Claire did not move toward the stairs. Years in the United States Marine Corps had taught her that fear became useful only when you refused to let it choose your next step. She kept one hand lightly on Atlas's collar and listened. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Nothing followed the creak above them. No footsteps. No closing door. Only rain brushing the windows and the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. Yet this moment had begun long before that afternoon. For nearly 3 months, Claire had been coming home to details that felt wrong in ways too small to explain. The first was a dining chair pulled several inches from the table. She remembered pushing it in before leaving for the grocery store, but memory could play tricks, especially when loneliness had turned one quiet day into another. A week later, she found the drawer beside her bed slightly open. Nothing was missing. 2 days after that, the framed photograph of her late husband, Daniel, was facing the wall. Claire had stood there for almost a minute, staring at the wooden back of the frame before turning it around. Daniel was smiling in the photograph, sunlight on his face, one hand resting between Atlas's ears. Claire told herself she must have moved it while dusting. She almost believed that. Atlas did not. His behavior changed first at night. For years, he had slept beside Claire's bed, usually curled near the window where moonlight painted silver along his black saddle. Then, without warning, he began choosing the hallway. Every evening he settled at the foot of the staircase, facing upward. Some nights Claire woke around 2 in the morning and found him sitting there instead of sleeping, ears raised toward the second floor. He never barked. He simply watched. That silence troubled her more than noise would have. Claire checked the locks. She replaced the batteries in the motion lights. She walked through every room twice before bed. Nothing. No broken window. No missing jewelry. No unfamiliar footprints in the yard. Still, the small changes continued. A closet door left open. A coffee mug moved from one cabinet shelf to another. The faint smell of dust in a bedroom that had been cleaned the day before. Each detail alone meant nothing. Together, They formed a question Claire could no longer ignore. So she created the vacation. She mentioned it casually where the right people could hear. She packed a suitcase, arranged for mail to be held, and drove away in full view of the neighborhood. Then she waited until afternoon and returned through the rear entrance with Atlas. Now, standing in the kitchen beneath the gray light of the storm, Claire understood why the plan had felt necessary. Atlas slowly released a breath and stepped away from her hand. He crossed the living room and stopped at the first stair. His nose lifted toward the dark landing. Claire followed several feet behind. Halfway up, Atlas paused, his amber eyes fixed not on her bedroom door, but above it, toward the ceiling, toward the attic. And from somewhere overhead came a faint sound, softer than a footstep, like something being carefully dragged across wood. Atlas remained on the stair for several seconds, his ears angled forward, his nose testing the cool air drifting down from the second floor. Claire knew that posture. He had worn it beside unfamiliar trails, crowded parking lots, and once during a thunderstorm when a frightened child had wandered behind their fence. It was not panic. It was concentration. Claire climbed one step higher. Atlas moved with her. The hallway above was dim, washed in the dull blue light of evening. Rain traced thin paths across the window at the far end, and the old oak floor reflected just enough light to reveal every familiar shape. Claire's bedroom door, the linen closet, the narrow table Daniel had built during their first winter in the house. Everything appeared untouched. Atlas reached the landing and turned toward the bedroom. Claire followed, keeping her breathing slow. The room smelled faintly of cedar, clean sheets, and the lavender sachet she kept inside the dresser. Her bed was made. The curtains were still. Daniel's photograph faced outward on the nightstand exactly where she had left it. For one hopeful second, Claire wondered whether the sound had been nothing more than the house settling under the rain. Then Atlas walked past the bed and stopped beside the wardrobe. His head lowered. A quiet growl returned. Claire crouched beside him. "Show me." Atlas pressed his nose toward the narrow space between the wardrobe and the wall. Claire switched on the lamp. Warm light filled the room, revealing nothing except painted drywall and a thin line of dust along the baseboard. She almost stood up, but Atlas moved closer and sniffed again. Claire looked down. The dust beneath the wardrobe had been disturbed. Not everywhere. Just along one edge, where several pale streaks crossed the darker floorboards. She touched one with her fingertip. Clean. Recent. Her eyes moved to the wardrobe. It was heavy solid oak, nearly 6 feet tall, and Claire had not moved it since Daniel helped place it there years ago. Yet one front leg sat slightly outside the faded mark it had left in the floor finish. Maybe half an inch. Small enough for anyone else to miss. Claire did not miss it. Atlas suddenly turned away. He crossed the bedroom, entered the hallway, and stopped beneath the attic hatch in the ceiling. His amber eyes lifted. Claire followed his gaze. The rectangular panel looked ordinary. White paint, brass pull ring, a faint shadow around the frame. She had checked the attic less than 2 weeks earlier after Atlas first began watching the ceiling. There had been nothing unusual then. Boxes of Christmas decorations, Daniel's old camping gear, a folded American flag stored carefully inside a cedar case. Atlas sniffed upward and gave a low sound from deep in his chest. Claire noticed something she had not seen before. The brass ring was moving. Barely. A tiny swing from side to side. There was no open window in the hallway. No vent blowing near it. Claire stood beneath the hatch without touching it. The ring slowed. Stopped. Atlas turned suddenly and walked toward the hallway vent several feet away. He sniffed the metal grill, then looked back at Claire. 3 places. The bedroom wall. The attic hatch. The vent. Claire stared from one to the next, and a pattern began forming in her mind. They were almost perfectly aligned. Somewhere behind those walls, the house had a space Claire had forgotten existed. Claire did not reach for the attic hatch. Not yet. She stepped back and studied the hallway as if it were a map she had been reading upside down for years. The bedroom wall stood on one end. The vent sat several feet beyond it. Above both ran the attic floor, hidden beneath insulation and old timber. Atlas moved between the 3 points slowly, nose close to the baseboard, then returned to the vent. He sniffed once and sat. Claire remembered Daniel complaining about this part of the house during their first winter here. The place had been built in the 1970s, then expanded decades later, and the renovation had left awkward gaps between the original structure and the newer addition. Daniel had called them useless pockets, narrow spaces too small for rooms and too inconvenient for storage. Claire had forgotten all about them. Until now. She knelt beside the vent and ran her fingers around its painted edge. 2 screws were coated with years of white paint. The third was not. Its metal head was clean. Fresh scratches curved around the slot. Someone had removed it recently. Atlas leaned closer, drawing a slow breath through his nose. Then he backed away and looked at Claire. She fetched a flashlight from the bedroom drawer and returned. The beam slipped through the grill, illuminating dust, ductwork, and a wooden support several inches beyond. Nothing moved. Claire changed the angle. Something pale clung to the corner of the metal frame. She pinched it carefully between 2 fingers and pulled it free. A short thread of dark blue fabric. Claire stared at it. She owned nothing that color upstairs. Atlas turned toward the attic hatch again. This time Claire followed. She pulled the brass ring. The folding ladder descended with a dry wooden groan, carrying down a breath of stale air that smelled of cardboard, cedar, and old insulation. Atlas remained below, watching. Claire climbed only high enough to shine the flashlight across the attic. Boxes rested where she remembered them. Christmas lights. Camping gear. Daniel's cedar case. Dust covered the floorboards in a soft gray layer, untouched except for a narrow line near the far wall. Claire moved the beam toward it. A trail crossed the dust. Not footprints. Something had been dragged. The marks disappeared behind a stack of boxes beside the old addition. Atlas gave one quiet growl from below. Claire descended and folded the ladder back into place. Her instincts told her not to chase an answer simply because it was close. She needed to understand the house first. Downstairs, she found Daniel's old folder of renovation papers in the desk. Yellowed receipts, warranty cards, sketches, measurements. Then one page stopped her. A hand-drawn floor plan showed the second-floor addition, and behind Claire's bedroom was a narrow service cavity connecting the attic to the hallway ductwork, nearly 3 feet wide in places, long enough to run behind the wall. Claire traced the pencil line with her finger. Atlas stood beside her, staring toward the ceiling. Then Claire noticed a handwritten note in Daniel's familiar script near the edge of the drawing. Access panel sealed during renovation. She read it twice. The panel should have been sealed. Upstairs, somewhere beyond the bedroom wall, something made a soft click. Atlas rose immediately. Claire looked at the floor plan again. This time she understood what had frightened her dog. The 3 warnings were not 3 separate places. They were 3 openings into the same hidden space. Claire left the renovation papers open on the kitchen table and checked the time. 7:26 in the evening. Outside, the rain had thickened, tapping against the windows with a steady patience that made the house feel farther from the rest of the world than it really was. The nearest neighbor lived less than 200 feet away, yet Claire could see only blurred porch lights through the wet glass. She turned off the kitchen lamp, then the living room lamp. One by one, the familiar rooms disappeared into darkness until only the gray wash of the storm remained. Atlas stayed beside her. Claire wanted the house quiet. If something was moving inside that hidden space, she wanted to hear it before it hurt her. They waited. 10 minutes became 20. The old refrigerator cycled off, leaving behind a silence so complete Claire could hear rainwater running through the gutter outside. Atlas lay near the bottom of the stairs, but his eyes remained open. At 8:17, his ears lifted. Claire heard nothing. Atlas rose and walked upstairs. She followed several feet behind, carrying the flashlight but keeping it switched off. At the landing, Atlas turned into the bedroom. He stopped beside the wardrobe again. Claire moved closer and noticed a thin draft against her hand. Cold air was slipping from behind the heavy oak cabinet. She placed her palm near the wall. There it was. Faint, but unmistakable. Air movement from a space that should have been sealed. Atlas sniffed along the baseboard, then nudged something beneath the wardrobe with his nose. A small metallic object slid into view and stopped against Claire's shoe. She bent down. For a moment, she forgot the hidden passage, forgot the rain, forgot to breathe. It was a military dog tag. Daniel's. The edges were worn smooth, and one corner carried the tiny scratch Claire remembered from the years he had worn it. She had searched for this tag for months after it disappeared from the wooden keepsake box downstairs. She had blamed herself, convinced grief had made her careless. Yet here it was, beneath furniture she had not moved in years. Atlas lowered his nose toward the tag, but did not touch it. Claire closed her fingers around the cool metal. Someone had handled this. Someone had carried a piece of Daniel into a place behind her walls. She looked at Atlas. You knew something was here. His ears shifted toward the ceiling. A faint vibration passed through the wall. Claire stood. She returned to the attic, this time moving the boxes near the far side until the flashlight revealed a narrow wooden panel behind them. The paint around its edge was cracked. Daniel's plans had said it was sealed. It was not sealed now. Claire pulled it open several inches. Stale air drifted out, carrying a smell that did not belong in an attic. Bottled water. Fabric. Something faintly sweet, like packaged food. She widened the opening and aimed the flashlight inside. A folded blanket rested against the wall. Beside it were empty water bottles, food wrappers, and a prepaid cell phone connected to a portable battery. Then Claire saw the photographs. Her driveway, her kitchen window, her bedroom, Atlas sleeping downstairs. And on top of the stack was a photograph taken that very morning. Claire stood beside her car, loading the Navy suitcase into the trunk. Her face was turned toward the street. The picture had been taken from inside the house. Claire felt Atlas become completely still behind her. Whoever had been watching her knew she had left. The question was whether they knew she had come back. Claire did not touch the prepaid phone. She left everything exactly where she had found it and backed away from the opening, Daniel's dog tag closed inside her fist. Atlas remained beside the attic ladder, staring into the narrow darkness behind the wall. Then the lights went out. The attic vanished. Downstairs, the refrigerator stopped humming, and the house fell into a silence so sudden Claire could hear the rain striking the roof above her. She switched on her flashlight. Easy, Atlas. He did not move. A flash of lightning turned the attic window white for half a second, followed several moments later by distant thunder. The storm could have taken the power. Claire knew that, but knowing it did not explain what happened next. Somewhere below them, a door clicked. Not the front door. Not the back. A smaller sound. Interior. Atlas turned instantly and descended the stairs. Claire followed, careful and quiet. The flashlight beam kept low across the floor. At the second-floor landing, Atlas stopped, his attention fixed on the hallway. Claire expected the growl. It never came. Instead, the German shepherd became completely silent. His tail lowered. His ears pointed toward the laundry room at the far end of the hall. Claire felt a chill move across her shoulders. Atlas had growled at uncertainty. This was different. He knew exactly where the sound had come from. Claire stood beside him. The laundry room door was closed. She remembered leaving it open that morning. Rain whispered against the glass behind them. The brass knob turned slowly. Claire did not approach. "I know you are there," she said. Her voice was calm, almost quiet. "Come out where I can see you." For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the door opened a few inches. A man stepped into the hallway with both hands visible. He looked tired, pale, and frightened rather than threatening. Claire recognized him immediately. Michael Reeves. He had worked on the house the previous fall, repairing water damage near the upstairs addition. He knew the attic. He knew the vents. More importantly, he knew about the old service cavity behind the bedroom wall. "Michael," Claire said. Atlas moved one step in front of her. Michael stopped. "Claire, please. I can explain. Start with why you are inside my house." His eyes dropped toward Atlas, then returned to her. "I thought you were gone." Claire opened her hand. Daniel's dog tag caught the flashlight beam. Michael's face changed. "Where did you get that?" "Behind my wall." He closed his eyes for a moment. That small reaction told Claire more than any answer could. "The photographs?" she asked. Michael swallowed. "I was not supposed to be here tonight." "That was not my question." Atlas remained motionless between them. No barking, no lunging, just watchful amber eyes and the quiet certainty of a dog that had already found what Claire had spent months doubting. Michael looked toward the dark staircase as if expecting someone else to appear. Claire noticed. "Who gave you access?" His silence lasted too long. Then, from outside, red and blue light began to flicker faintly across the rain-covered windows. Claire had quietly triggered the emergency alert on her phone before leaving the attic. Michael saw the lights and lowered his head. "You do not understand," he said. Claire waited. His next words came almost as a whisper. "She told me you would not be back until Sunday." Claire felt Daniel's dog tag grow cold in her palm. Michael looked at her, and for the first time that night, Claire realized the stranger inside her house might not be the person who frightened her most. For a moment, Claire heard nothing except the rain and the muted arrival of vehicles outside. Red and blue light moved across the hallway walls, sliding over framed photographs, the old banister, and Atlas's black and tan coat. Michael remained where he was, hands visible, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Who told you?" Claire asked. Michael hesitated. "Lauren." The name landed softly, which somehow made it worse. Lauren Pierce had been Claire's closest friend for almost 9 years. She had brought coffee to the hospital during Daniel's final days. She had sat beside Claire at the funeral without filling the silence with words. She had kept Atlas when Claire needed to travel. She had carried a spare key to this house because Claire believed there should always be one person you could call at 2 in the morning without explaining why. "Lauren Pierce?" Claire asked, though there was no other Lauren who mattered. Michael nodded. The front door opened downstairs as responding officers announced themselves. Claire called down that everyone upstairs was safe, then stepped back while Atlas stayed close to her leg. Within minutes, the strange quiet of the house filled with calm voices, flashlights, radios, and the careful movement of people documenting what Claire had found. Michael did not resist when officers escorted him downstairs. Before he disappeared from view, he looked back once. "Check the phone," he said. Later, beneath the bright kitchen lights restored after the brief outage, an officer placed the prepaid phone inside an evidence bag. Claire could see the dark screen through the clear plastic. It seemed impossible that something so small could contain an answer large enough to change the shape of 9 years. The messages were recovered that night. Most were ordinary instructions written without names. Times. Dates. When Claire left for appointments. When she walked Atlas. Which evenings she attended the Veterans Support Group across town. Then came the message about the vacation. Leaving Friday morning. Back Sunday evening. House will be clear. Claire stared at those words until they blurred. Michael had not guessed her schedule. Someone had been feeding it to him. One message mentioned the Navy suitcase. Another described the rear porch light Claire always left on when she traveled. Details shared casually over coffee with someone she trusted. Still, Claire wanted proof stronger than familiarity. Then an investigator read one final message aloud. "Make sure our Captain Sunshine does not come home early." Claire closed her eyes. Daniel had called her Captain Sunshine during their first year together, teasing her because she had been the least cheerful person at breakfast. After his death, only Lauren still used it, usually when Claire became too serious and Lauren wanted to make her smile. Atlas pressed his shoulder against Claire's knee. She rested her hand on his head. "It is her," Claire said. Her voice did not break. It simply became quieter. The investigation would later show that Lauren had given Michael access to the spare key and shared Claire's routine while telling herself that no real harm would come from it. Michael had used the hidden service cavity during previous repair work and returned without Claire's knowledge. The reasons mattered to investigators. To Claire, the deeper wound was simpler. Lauren had known exactly how hard trust had become after Daniel died. She had been invited into the quietest rooms of Claire's grief. And somewhere along the way, that trust had become information to trade. Near midnight, after the officers finished their first search, Claire stood alone at the bottom of the staircase. Atlas sat beside her, tired but alert. Upstairs, the hidden space was no longer hidden. The secret had a name now. Claire opened her hand and looked at Daniel's dog tag resting against her palm. For months, she had questioned her memory, her instincts, even the small uneasiness that followed her from room to room. Atlas never had. He had watched the ceiling when she looked away. He had guarded the stairs when she tried to sleep. He had listened when the house whispered something Claire was not yet ready to hear. She lowered her hand, and Atlas gently touched his nose to the worn metal tag. Claire looked down at him. "You stayed," she whispered. Atlas leaned against her leg, and in the rain-washed silence of that house, Claire finally understood that discovering who had betrayed her was only half the truth. The other half had been beside her all along. Morning came quietly, carrying the clean scent that follows a long Virginia rain. Claire had not slept. She sat on the kitchen floor with her back against a cabinet while Atlas rested beside her, his head across her knee, finally allowing exhaustion to close his eyes. The officers had left before dawn. The hidden space upstairs was sealed for the investigation, and the house felt strangely larger now that its secret had been exposed. Claire looked around at the ordinary things she had once trusted without thinking. Daniel's coffee mug near the sink, the faded photograph on the refrigerator, mud drying beside Atlas's water bowl. Nothing had changed, yet everything had. Her hand moved slowly through the thick fur behind Atlas's ears, and her fingers touched the worn leather of his collar. She had seen that collar thousands of times. Daniel had ordered it years earlier, back when Atlas was still young enough to trip over his own paws. Claire remembered laughing when Daniel insisted on having something engraved inside it. "A dog does not need a motto," she had told him. Daniel had smiled. "Maybe we do." Claire carefully turned the collar until the small brass plate hidden against the leather caught the morning light. The engraving had faded at the edges, but the words remained clear. "Trust what stays." Claire stared at them. For years, she had thought Daniel meant loyalty in the simplest way. Coming home, keeping promises, standing beside someone when life became difficult. But grief had changed the meaning of almost everything. People had arrived after Daniel died with flowers, casseroles, cards, and promises to call. Then seasons passed. Voices became less frequent. Chairs around the kitchen table became empty again. Lauren had been different. She stayed, or Claire had believed she did. Atlas stirred beneath her hand and opened his amber eyes. There was no suspicion in them now, no warning. Only the same patient attention he had given Claire through every difficult morning of the past 2 years. He had never asked her to explain why she sometimes stood in Daniel's closet just to remember the scent of cedar and aftershave. He had never hurried her when a photograph stopped her halfway across a room. He simply remained. Claire reached into her pocket and removed Daniel's dog tag. The metal was warm now from being carried close to her all night. She held it near Atlas's collar, 2 worn objects from the life they had shared before loss rearranged everything. "He knew, did he not?" Claire whispered. Atlas lifted his head and rested his muzzle against her wrist. A small laugh escaped her, fragile and unexpected. It was the first sound that morning that did not belong to grief. Claire looked toward the staircase. She knew there would be repairs, questions, statements, and difficult days ahead. Trust would not return because a hidden door had been found, or because the truth finally had names. Some things healed more slowly. Atlas rose, stretched, then walked toward the back door. He looked over his shoulder at Claire, waiting. For the first time in months, she did not check the ceiling before following him. She opened the door. Cool morning air entered the kitchen, carrying wet leaves, distant birdsong, and the soft golden light of a world beginning again. Atlas stepped onto the porch, then stopped until Claire joined him. He could have gone ahead. He stayed. 3 weeks later, the house sounded like itself again. The damaged wall had been repaired, the hidden service cavity permanently closed, and every lock had been changed. Claire could have sold the place. More than one person suggested it. Start somewhere new, they said. Find a house without memories in the walls. But Claire knew memories were not the problem. Daniel had once planted the maple beside the driveway with a shovel borrowed from a neighbor. Atlas had learned to climb the porch steps here when his paws were still too large for his body. Claire had stood at the kitchen window through winters, thunderstorms, birthdays, and the long quiet year after Daniel was gone. Leaving would not erase what happened. Staying did not mean pretending it never happened. So Claire stayed. On a cool evening near the end of October, she carried Daniel's framed photograph upstairs and placed it back on the nightstand. Beside it, she set the recovered dog tag. The metal caught the amber light from the lamp, no longer hidden beneath furniture or trapped behind a wall. Atlas watched from the doorway. He had changed, too. For months, he had slept at the foot of the stairs, listening to something Claire could not hear. Now he followed her downstairs, crossed the living room, and settled beside the front door with a long, peaceful sigh. Claire smiled. Good choice. She stepped onto the porch and switched on the light. A warm circle spread across the wooden steps and into the yard. Beyond it, Virginia autumn stretched beneath a clear night sky. Leaves whispered along the sidewalk. Somewhere down the block, a screen door closed. A pickup truck rolled slowly past and disappeared around the corner. Ordinary sounds. Claire had forgotten how comforting ordinary could be. Atlas came outside and sat beside her. She lowered herself onto the top step, and he leaned against her shoulder with enough weight to make her laugh softly. Claire rested one hand against his collar. Beneath the leather, the little brass plate remained hidden, its words unseen but no longer forgotten. Trust what stays. She looked through the front window at the home she had almost allowed fear to take from her. there were still moments when uncertainty returned. A creak upstairs, a shadow crossing the hallway, the old instinct to check every lock twice. Healing did not arrive like a switch turning on. It came quietly, one ordinary evening at a time. A full night of sleep. A cup of coffee left unfinished because the morning felt too beautiful to spend indoors. A German shepherd finally sleeping without watching the ceiling. Claire understood something Daniel might have known when he chose those words years ago. Loyalty was not always dramatic. Sometimes it was simply a presence beside you when the room grew dark. Sometimes it was a pair of amber eyes refusing to look away when you had stopped trusting your own. Sometimes grace came without an explanation, warm and breathing, resting its head against your knee. A breeze moved through the maple branches. Claire reached for the porch light switch, then stopped. She decided to leave it on. Atlas lowered his head across her boots and closed his eyes. Inside, Daniel's dog tag rested beside his photograph. Outside, Claire listened to the wind and felt no need to search the darkness for answers. The house was quiet now, not the hollow silence of something hiding, but the gentle quiet of a place becoming home again. And beside her, Atlas slept.